a big crowd, huh?
Why did they open it up?
Just getting more seats.
Yep.
No, she's a week off.
Scheduled to be public or something?
Public. I think everything's going to be out in public.
Okay, very good.
I think we have a disappointed audience, to say the least.
I'm not disappointed that it was not public.
I was going to put some public comment. If they want, before we start.
Sure.
People can something to say they feel like about commenting that.
Yep.
Exactly. One would be mom and two themselves.
Last few years, it's had issues during the summer.
You're bringing new people up from.
Except for Steve's.
No, I think it's more people knowing that they can't just go up there and strip out content and whatever else. They can get their hands on quick.
Going to start soon. Sue gets back.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's 8 or a little after, and the purpose of the meeting is to discuss the exemption requested by the Peaceful Assembly Church. And I thought that I would allow public comment before we started, so if anybody would like to say anything, now is a good time. Jim?
What's the necessity of meeting today on the exemption? You could vote on that at any time, is that true? And you can make it even.
We have a deadline of July 1st whether we have to respond or not.
State deadline.
On the exemption.
Any exemption.
Yeah.
So the state says if someone applies for an exemption, you have to make a decision by June 30th, is it?
Yeah, July 1st.
July 1st.
Okay, and so this has nothing to do with any taxes that are due on that property?
Back taxes, you mean?
Yes, correct.
No,
Only future?
only future. Right.
Okay. Has there been any kind of discussions with the group or agreement that if they do get an exemption, what they can do with that property? Is there anything to prevent them from making, or even turning it over back to John? What?
Well, I would imagine. Well, I'll tell you something about the exemption. Just so the exemption is 1 year. After 1 year, we sign another. And that's the way it is with every church in town. Every religious exemption has to be re-upped. So that if something like that were to happen, then we would have the authority to deny the next exemption.
Okay. Would you read the
it to me, I'll read it.
None of the other selectmen have it?
It's in the, I believe it's in the office. This is the issue of having the meetings over here, is when we're over there, we just go back and forth.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, it is from Mark Stetson at Avatar, and I have read this in a previous meeting. Dear board members, Sue has forwarded me a copy of BTLA A-9 application for religious property exemption for property located at 860 Main Street. RSA 72:23(3) provides a property tax exemption for houses of public worship, parish houses, church parsonages occupied by their pastors, convents, monasteries, buildings, and the lands appertaining to them, owned, used, and occupied directly for religious training or for other religious purposes by any regularly recognized and constituted denomination, creed, or sect, organized, incorporated, or legally doing business in the state, and the personal property used by them for the purposes for which they are established. Via a deed recorded on August 1st, 2013, John Cannell conveyed the subject property to the Peaceful Assembly Church. The Peaceful Assembly Church is described as a New Hampshire voluntary association. In that deed, included in the application is a copy of the Articles of Agreement of a New Hampshire nonprofit corporation for the Peaceful Assembly Church that was filed with the Secretary of State's office on July 25th, 2013. During an inspection of the property completed on May 2nd, 2014, I was informed by a member of the Board of Directors that the Peaceful Assembly Church has not applied to be recognized as tax exempt as a church by the Internal Revenue Service. Without such a designation, it is my opinion that the Peaceful Assembly Church does not meet the definition of a church legally doing business in the state, and I recommend that this application be denied. And as always, feel free to contact me.
Thank you.
That's what it says.
Thank you.
When I further clarified that with him on the phone, he basically said that this is a case that he believes that should go to court, because he didn't really have a clear example either way of that. And, do we have any other comments?
Of course.
Who wants to go first?
Can you walk us through what's happened so far related to them so we're all on the same page?
Well,
Where it began and,
I can just give you a synopsis.
Yeah, yeah.
It's only from my memory.
oh
You know, when they
no.
bought, when they,
Maybe
my
someone
memory's-
else could do
no,
it.
my memory is like right on, it's spot on. You know, the only things I forget are things that you tell me. But I guess it was back in 2010, that John bought the Peaceful Assembly Church. And at that time, he was pretty excited about it. I don't know what his original intentions were, but they soon changed to like he'd like to keep it a church and would like to get an exemption, and filed for an exemption every year since then. And was denied every year since then.
Filed with
Filed with,
BTLA?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and was denied. And the difference now being is back in August 2013, John turned the ownership of the church over to an entity that's called the Peaceful Assembly Church, and to a board of directors. And they filed for nonprofit status, and they've come back and applied for an exemption again. And as you know from the letter I just read from Mark from Avatar, it was denied. They came to our last board meeting and said, we don't agree with that view from Avatar, and could you check with your council and get back to us by July 1st to see if that would change. And that's where we are right now. And I have contacted legal counsel, and they have a response from them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Gretchen?
Yeah, so from what I'm hearing, it sounds as if the corporation now owns the church, is that correct?
Correct.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
And has it been recorded with the register of deeds as such?
Yes, it has.
Okay. And you've already said that they haven't gotten federal nonprofit.
That's my
Recognition.
understanding, yes.
Exactly, right, okay. You know, I find all this very interesting, is because I know the attorney is advising one thing, and my feelings are take it to court. We had the Unification Churches, Sean probably remembers, I'm not sure whether the other people remember, back in the 80s. This is an international recognized church that was set up as a retreat on Wild Meadow Road and also as a training center. The Board of Selectmen at that time denied that recognition. And they immediately, when they came to Grafton, got involved in the community. They donated their services and their time. They gave lobsters to different facilities. There was, you know, they immediately tried to become part and contribute to the community. I find, you know, I heard about the list of what they were saying that the church supposedly has done so far for the community, and it's nothing different than any of us in this front row have done for the town. One of the things I'll address directly is the mention of the food pantry. I've had a food pantry for 8 years. I've not once had somebody come to me who's been referred by the corporation to me. I was not contacted during holiday giving boxes to find out if I knew of anybody who would appreciate getting such. I was not told about the feast that they supposedly had to let people know who would really appreciate it, be able to know there was some place in town that they can go to participate in that. They would have been very appreciative. I myself would have been. So I don't see, you know, where, you know, the list that has been given is any different than what I have done for the past 36 years. You know, what's been, you know, stated as what has been helping the community are things that we all do. We all volunteer our efforts. And when I go out and I console somebody or I direct them to a service that can assist them, I do it as myself. I don't do it as the Good Folks Pantry. You know, it is entirely different. And getting down to, you know, again, just focusing purely on the food pantry, none of the outreach services are aware that they exist. There's no listings in the Valley News that this pantry exists. Listen is not aware that they exist. And you can take everything that they've stated and go back and say, well, we helped Tracy with this and we have worked with LBS. That's no different than me contacting them as an individual. And I think if you approach those, you know, the Recreation Committee or LBS, they'll tell you the exact same thing. It's just somebody coming forth, such as baking Christmas cookies to be donated to the town. So I strongly feel that the town, the select board should be denying this. I don't see any grounds that it should be given. And I think that if you turn and find that you are fearful of a lawsuit to do this, you're going to have a lot more people coming in asking for the same thing. Hell, I've been doing ceremony, been doing this since I've been in Grafton. I'll apply for it, if it's as simple as this.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing about, we do have status recognized with the federal government as a nonprofit. With churches, it's IRS publication 1828. A church, if it's legally doing business in the state, it's legally registered as a nonprofit, it's automatically considered a 501c3 nonprofit by the IRS. You don't have to seek the application. So we actually are recognized by the IRS.
Do you have documents to show us that?
Yep, it's IRS publication 1828, second or third page.
And that shows that you actually have the approval as opposed to in general, that's where it works.
No, what the IRS says is we don't need to actually get approval. A church, if it's engaging in activities as a church and it's recognized in its state, is automatically exempt under IRS rules. That's what their publication says. You can apply if you want to take the time and the money to do so, but you don't have to.
But we're not recognizing you as a church. You're not a church.
This is our meeting. So if somebody wants a chance to comment, I'm letting everybody comment. So, Jim?
This is a religious exemption, but the corporation described themselves as a volunteer group. They do not, are not describing themselves as a religious organization.
Jeremy?
That's incorrect. The legal term is voluntary association, which is just their term for a nonprofit.
Okay.
That's a Secretary of State term of art, that's all.
Okay, so whatever, that's what you're describing yourself, you're not describing yourself as a religious group.
In the thing we filed, we specifically stated it's a church, it's organized exclusively for religious purposes. That's right in the document, Form NP1 we filed with the Secretary of State.
My name is Nancy Carr Robertson, and I live on Beard Lane in Grafton. And I actually worked for Dartmouth Hitchcock for 7 years, trying to explain and documenting as best we possibly could why that large organization was tax exempt and should be tax exempt. And that came down to how much financial value it reinvested in the community. And I'm not aware of any financial value that you all are providing into the community, and I'd like to hear about that if it's all right with the select board.
It's all right with me.
We provided a list of like the stuff we've done to the town when they asked about it. I mean, the church is operating on a shoestring right now, so we really don't have much money to, we're not taking in much money, we're not putting out much money. It's one church, it's one building, the pastor doesn't have any money himself. But we've held community events there. John does do religious services there for people that are interested in that kind of thing. We have, I know Gretchen mentioned that about the food pantry stuff. We didn't, I personally, I don't know about Jen, I personally didn't know that she does a food pantry, but we've been connected with the, I think they're called the Ecumenical Council in, Tom, do you remember what the full name of them is? Lutheran Ecumenical Council?
I believe Muscogee.
Mascoma Lutheran Ecumenical Council. We worked through them, and we worked through another organization out of Manchester called Shire Sharing. We brought them up here this year, and we distributed, I think, over a dozen food baskets to people. Oh, we also work with the Women's Benevolent Society in Grafton. Tom contacted them to get contacts of people who would need such things. We've only been around for 3 years. We're just starting up. Dartmouth, the college, has been around for hundreds of years. I don't know about the hospital, but you know, you guys have had a lot more time to get established than we have.
Well, I've also worked for other nonprofits as a volunteer, and I helped get the Mascoma Watershed Conservation Council started, the Mascoma Valley Health Initiative. I was founding board member of both those organizations because of my expertise in this. And I guess this is the way I'm coming at it. I live here, right now, I'm on a very limited budget. I don't have much income either, but I pay my fair share of taxes, and I'm not convinced that you're providing enough quality return to the community for you to be tax-free. That's what it looks like to me from the outside, and I realize I may need to learn more about what you're doing, but from what I know now, I actually feel like it's just a scam, and I don't appreciate that at all as somebody who's struggling to pay my fair share.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. I mean, I live somewhere where the taxes are paid. I don't live at the church. John's the only person that lives there, and John is trying to do stuff for the community. You can go and talk to him anytime he's there and get his take on things. So.
Gretchen?
Jeremy mentioned I can't pronounce the word, Ecumenical Council dealing with the Thanksgiving boxes. That's who I work with. And it just basically, I get boxes that it's donated to the community. I'm not recognized as a religious organization. I get the list of the churches who participate in that, who gather that food. They're not in it.
Maureen?
I also, as welfare administrator, worked with them, and I don't believe they're in it either.
Catherine?
I'm curious as to why they don't apply through to the federal government exemption, even if it's in a line on publication, whatever it is. To go through the procedure is not very onerous, and it establishes everything in law.
Jeremy?
When John was running the church himself, his attitude was he did not want to deal with the federal government. There actually are a large number of churches out there that don't do 501c3. There's one somewhere in New Hampshire, he actually runs this thing called the Unincorporated Church Movement. His name is Garrett Lear, and he tells people about how and their church is recognized as an exempt church in New Hampshire. John did not want to be involved with the federal government, doesn't want to talk to them, doesn't want to sign that paperwork. We've looked at it, we're opposed to doing it also, and even if we weren't opposed to doing it, it's $400 to file the paperwork for small organizations, $750 for larger ones. That's the number I got from another
You
organization.
can file that for free.
For 501c3?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
You don't have to pay a penny.
Okay, well, the board decided to go with John's recommendation that we don't involve ourselves with the federal government. We found 1828, which says that we don't have to, we're recognized automatically as a church.
Okay.
I'm puzzled here. It seems to me there's an ideological conflict. If you won't recognise the federal government, why should you be recognising your local government to be able to take from the tax base of the town, which is limited enough already, in favour of them for not having to pay $400 to file to the federal government, which I think is a flaw.
Yeah, well, this is the one thing I'd like to say about that, and I know that when John bought the church back in 2010, he didn't, and I guess he's pretty strong-headed, and felt that he just had to ask the town. That was it. Didn't really come and talk to the town regarding this matter. And I know that created hard feelings. But since then, they've gone and he's taken the church, he's turned it over to a board of trustees, and from my perspective, the board of trustees has now come to the board of selectmen. That hasn't happened. That has not happened at all. And the board appreciates that. And we're trying to make our best decision on this, and we want to try and be fair to everybody. And I realize the comments that everybody made, it's a perception thing with the Peaceful Assembly Church. And unfortunately in the community, they don't have the best perception of them. So I think that's something they're trying to overcome with this. Gretchen?
It is not a perception on my part.
I understand.
Okay? I regret, I do not like you implying that it is a perception on my part. Again, as Carr had pointed out, I live below the poverty line. I have a hard time enough as it is paying my taxes. And even having any kind of religious organization, I still question why it is that the federal government allows them to have the tax exempt status. I feel everybody should pay, especially in New Hampshire, since we don't have an income tax and we don't have a sales tax, that it's relied completely upon the property taxes. That I shouldn't be burdened anymore than what I already am. And I heard a list of what it is that the church supposedly has done, and I've done exactly the same thing as a lot of other people have done. As I say, I don't feel that this is a situation that needs recognition, and I do feel that they have to go and get federal recognition as a religious organization. Do they have a bank account? And if you have a bank account, I believe you got to, when I was part of a nonprofit organization and we had our board of directors. We had to establish bylaws, and this was all filed with the federal government in order to get our tax exempt tax number. And if they haven't done that, how are they taking in monies and distributing it?
Okay.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, Mayor.
You can, since you haven't gone, I'll let you go, and then we're going to go to our meeting. Go ahead.
Yes, there are a lot of perceptions, there's a lot of legalese going back and forth. Long before it became recognized by the state and established, the doors were always open. Since I've been elected chairman of the board, I have seen very few Grafton people come, neighbors don't come over, but they know a lot about the church. They know everything. The board of directors meetings are open. They're open to members, they're open to the public. It has been that way since we started. Do we publish? No. Everyone is invited. John always has, and we continue that this day. The church is open to everyone, of all faiths or no faiths. If they choose not to enter between the door or step on the property, we will not force them. We will not use force. They don't want to come. They want to use I do call it their perception of what the church is. I hear we're being told that we must do things that are not mandatory. That's all I'm going to say. We have to go to the next step. As you said, Avatar mentioned, it might be a legalese thing. So none of us are lawyers, attorneys.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I'm going to just read the response I got from our council regarding this, so everybody knows. And it says, let me start by suggesting that questions about exemptions, as opposed to tax abatements, are legal questions and should probably bypass Avatar and come directly to our office. The statute says that the religious organization must be organized, incorporated, or legally doing business in the state. Peaceful Assembly Church is organized in the state, and therefore it is irrelevant whether it is tax-exempt church under the IRS code. The question that must be answered is whether the property is being used for religious purposes. I recommend that a letter be sent to the Peaceful Assembly Church asking how the property is used for religious training or for other religious purposes. Once we have that information, we can review the response. And at that point, I requested the Peaceful Assembly Church, give us a list of things that they are doing for the community, which they did. And the response from the attorney was that they, I don't have that with me. Yes, I do. No, I have the response of Sam Green, but the response from Laura was that it appears that they, and it's based on their having regular services. All the other community activities are really secondary to it. Services were the number one thing, and based on that, it appears that they qualify for the exemption. I asked our DRA representative, Sam Green, what he thought of the matter, and basically he responded with the RSA that we read in Avatar's response, and he also responded by saying that we should refer that to our legal counsel.
Can I say that again?
He said that we should go ask our legal counsel. So he really didn't give us any insight one way or the other. He just said, go ask Laura, which we did already, and we have her response.
Where's your response?
Now, I also talked to Laura before the meeting, and she's available if any of the board members feel that we need to have further counsel. She's aware of this meeting, and she's aware it's sensitive, and we want to make sure that we have, all the counsel that we feel we need.
So I'm going to make a statement on this as well. I've done quite a bit of thinking about this, and in comparison to other scenarios that have happened in the state and around the state. And it's interesting that Gretchen brought up the Unification Church, because that was one of my examples that I intended to use, and because I grew up right down the road from when that happened. And if you folks are not aware, that group bought property in and around the state, and I can't think of the exact name of the town where they were based out of, but what it ended up happening is they purchased so much property in the town, and it became tax exempt, that it drove the residents that had been there for years and years and years out of the town because they couldn't afford the taxes anymore, because the tax base kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So that is a huge concern to me, because I think if something is occurring that's maybe right at the legal bar or below it, or just above it, you always introduce a possibility for that type of thing to happen. And I consider that my position as a selectman to keep an eye on that, to protect the average citizen from something that may not be intended or is intended, but to that end affects the overall population of the town. And I view this, after reviewing it, as that potential. You know, if you look at the standards that they provided, you know, if you look at the IRS standards and the state standards, one of those things is a history of operation. And I think the intent of that, the way that I read it, is a history of operation is we're not talking about a month or 2 months or a year. We're talking about a long affiliation with some type of religious group. And I use the word affiliation intentionally because that's another aspect of that. You're supposed to be affiliated with some religious group. And to my knowledge, you're not affiliated with any specific religious group. And that, therefore, I have a hard time with this because to me it's like putting a sign up to Grafton and saying, it doesn't matter if you're not affiliated with anybody, you can create an entity and have a tax-exempt organization in this town. And that's a huge legal liability for this town, and it's a huge liability as far as the people that live here that want to remain here and want it to remain a place that they can afford to live. And I see this as causing a potential issue for those people. And therefore, I will be voting against this to make this a tax-free entity. Or not, as far as the town's concerned, for that tax exempt.
Mine, obviously I'm pretty new to the whole church thing because I've been doing that since 2010 and going through different steps. I've talked to, actually 2 people have gone to that church and stuff on the phone, and my biggest thing is it seems like there's not a scheduled time. Both the people that I asked, they said, well, we meet, you know, we're only meeting monthly now instead of like, most all the other churches I know have set dates that they, you know, that they meet regardless of what their religion is, regardless of what the day is. You know, and even signs saying, you know, out front maybe that this is when we meet, this is when we do this. And just in talking with you, the thing that really turned me off in our non-public meeting that we had was just seemed like how you're going about stuff and pushing through the legal matters instead of getting it accepted almost from the town and proving, you know, that we're a church and we're going to offer something, you know, to the community and stuff instead of, it kind of seems like, you know, putting up a cold shoulder to the community and we're going to push this through. We're not going away, you know, we'll go to legal matters and bring this to court and sue if need be, instead of, you know, coming through as a church and accepted, you know, through the community and people in the community saying, hey, they're doing a great thing out here or something. It's kind of really pushing up this wall between tax-paying citizens and people that aren't, you know, that the church that wants the you know, tax exemption, the religious tax exemption. Seems like it's more just pushing for the legal. We need to do X, Y, and Z just to get here instead of, you know, actually having a church as I feel that you guys aren't there. If that's where your goal is, I think that's where you guys should focus on first, getting the church there, and then get the tax exemption. It all seems like you're trying to get the tax exemption with plans of this other stuff in the future. So at this point, I have to say that I'm not in agreements with their tax exemption at this point.
There's one more
Sure.
addition to that. The end story of that Unification Church is, I believe the church went bankrupt to some extent. The property was sold off at auction, and and then they left that whole town in limbo, because now they had all this property that the town had to deal with, and some of it now was under government control because the government's the one that found them to be evading taxes and whatnot.
I'm pretty sure it was Lemster, which is kind of interesting.
Lemster, is it Lemster? I couldn't think of the name of the town, yeah. So it created a huge issue, and so I'm trying to look at this from a historical standpoint on what's happened in the past and applying current scenarios to that.
Okay, well, this sounds like the board is not going to be looking at this favorably, but I would just like to state my opinion, so for the record. And I know that when I used to be friends or next door neighbors with John, I had quite a few conversations with him. And when he bought the church and told me it was going to be, he's going to keep it a church, I rolled my eyes. I, asked him who was going to get for a minister and that sort of thing. And he, and I had told him, if you meet all the requirements, then I will certainly vote to give you tax exempt status. And for years, he didn't. And now I feel that they are. And I was here when the Unification Church came up the Mile Meadow Road, and I understand the point about buying large tracts of land and having tax exempt, what that does to the, to the balance of the people. But I know that since Avatar's taken over, we've had instances where churches have filed a religious exemption for large tracts of land, and they were denied just because of that. So I know that we have a method to stop that. I feel I too would like to see the IRS exemption in, but I believe that according to Laura that it is not necessary. I think that the church is trying to do everything they can to integrate into the community. Whether they should have all these things done prior to getting the exemption or after, I don't know. That's a good point. But I came here today prepared to vote yes. So with that, should we take a vote on this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to grant the Peaceful Assembly Church religious exemption for a year.
Second.
And
Motion.
the seconds, that doesn't have to be a second. The motion can just wither away.
It should be voted on, so in order for it to be voted on, I'll second the motion.
Okay, so do we have any further discussion?
Steve, can I make a comment?
What?
I want to answer what Leon said because he's operating from factually incorrect
No, you can't.
information.
I'm sorry, you can't.
Okay.
So, any further discussion?
No.
No, all those in favor of granting the exemption, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say
Nay.
no. Okay, so that's it. It's 2-1, and the exemption request has been denied. The next legal course is to appeal to either Superior Court or to the BTLA by September 1st. And if there's any other business, I don't think that we can't do any other business right now, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second, motion to adjourn.